Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Patrick Dahlin and today we're going to talk about the optimal amount of carbohydrates to take on a ketogenic diet and on a low carb diet, and a little bit what is the difference between the ketogenic and the low carb diet. And this is to some part, I do this video because I got the idea when I got some questions in the comments, so thanks for that, Maria. So if you're interested in this, well, this is the video for you. So before I get started here, there's one simple answer to this, and then there's the one not so simple answer, because how much carb you optimally should eat depends. But we'll come to that factor later here. Let's start with the simple things. What will be the optimal amount of carbohydrates to eat if you want to be low carb but not ketogenic? The answer is 120 grams of carbs. Okay, why 120? Why not 100? 180? You can eat more than 120, you will just be a little bit less low carb. The reason why you don't want to go under it is because some parts of your body, like the brain, the central nervous system, and also the red blood cells, they cannot use fat, to a large extent at least, for the energy demands. So they need to use glucose. And they together uses roughly about 120 grams. And this is pretty much the same. It doesn't matter so much if you're a large person or small or female or male. Because our brain uses approximately the same amount of energy regardless, and our other parts also. And if you go below that, let's say to 100 grams, you're missing 20 grams, and this is no disaster. The body can easily make its own glucose from amino acids. But that also means that between meals, particularly we don't eat so often, when the body needs glucose and it's missing, it will take that from amino acids. And if you haven't eaten any recently, and amino acids are the part of proteins, it will take them from your protein, your muscles. And there's two things that you don't want. That one is that you just want to preserve your muscles and just burn fat. And the second is that the body doesn't want this either. It knows that amino acids are valuable. It doesn't want to use them for energy. And it will send hunger signals to you. And you might just feel a bit sluggish and poor and not so good when this happens. Anytime if you are keto or fasting and you have one of those devices where you can measure what energy substance you're using, anytime you feel really bad, it's usually when the fat, before you have entered full ketosis, it goes up and down. It is when you can see that you're using less fat and more carbs, and those carbs have to be replenished from protein, and the body tells you no, and fights that. And that is what you feel. It doesn't feel good. It feels like you have low blood sugar, you can be a little bit dizzy, can get headache, can get extreme cravings, almost start to shake, you just want to eat something. So therefore you don't want to go below 120, because then you will just use protein to cover that up. And of course, if you go above, there's no big potato happening more than if you, let's say, eat 100 grams above that 220, still kind of low carbish. But of course, those 100 grams, that energy from those would have been used to burn fat otherwise. So therefore 120 would be the optimal, and then you eat some fat, and the rest of the fat the body needs, it will burn from your body fat, unless you totally overeat fat then, of course. So that's the low carb first, a simple answer. Then we'll come back to it, because that 120 may change also depending on your lifestyle. What about ketogenic then? Why would they benefit from eating less than 20? I was told it was not such a good idea. Well, if you go ketogenic, you often hear the number 20 grams of carbs. And I think most researchers or people that have experimented with this have learned it from experience, empirical data. They've tried to go zero, and it just is hard. And 40 and 50 also here, anything below 50, because then you enter ketosis usually. But if you count the slightest wrong and you're above 50, it takes weeks or maybe never to really get into full ketosis. So 20 is a good aim for. And if we look at 20, how does this equation look now? Because what happens with ketosis is that you produce 2 ketones, or actually 3, but 2 that the body really use, acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. And those 2 together covers the brain's energy needs to 2/3. So of those 120 grams of carb you need, 80 grams of them comes from ketone, because the brain can also use ketones. And then you need 20 grams of carb, then you're up to 100 grams. And then the last 20 grams to 120 are actually covered from fat. You might have heard that fatty acid cannot be converted to carbs, which is true for even number fatty acids. Odd numbers can to some extent become carbs, but they're not so common in our diet. But each fat consists, the name of them are triglycerides, and triglyceride means glycerol, and glycerol can to 100% be converted to glucose. So each fat, you have 3 fatty acids stuck to 1 glycerol. And in the long fatty acids like palmitate, oleic and so on, it's roughly 6% of that fat that can become carbs. For medium chains like MCT oils and coconut, it's about 10% that can become carbohydrate. And for shorter chains like butyrate that you have in butter and others, it's about 25% of that fat that can be converted into glucose. It's not the fatty acid, it's a glycerol part of fat, of triglycerides. So all in all, when people eat like 250 grams of fat, that generates also 20 grams of carbs. And if you add all this together, you see you end up at 120 again, the medical number. Then, of course, you can add more carbs than it. You can add 40, and as long as you're still in ketosis, that works. But if you are eating 50 grams carb and falls out of ketosis, then those 80 grams of ketones here, they disappear. And then suddenly you're in a shortage again. You have to have 50 plus maybe 20, that's 70, and you're in a shortage up to 120 grams that you need to supply the body with. And then all this breakdown of protein, starch, and the body feels not so enthusiastic about it. So that's the base, and it works for many people as advice. Also, many people using this diet might be obese. Many people in studies are a little bit obese or fat. And many people that talk about the success of what to start at a high weight. But what if you're not that heavy? What if you're a quite active person, an athlete, training a lot or start to train a lot? Well, then it changes, because 120 grams of carb was what the body needs, and then all the muscles, the heart, everything came as fats, and the brain came as ketones or glucose. But if you do high intensity workouts, well, then the body also needs to use glucose. And then suddenly you need more than 120 grams per day, and then you have to adjust accordingly. So how do you know how much more then? There's a rule of thumb you can use there. Let's say you do one workout, maybe it's 1 hour or something like that, and you have one of those devices that measure your heart rate and therefore gives you some feedback on it. So maybe it tells you that you've been out on this run or interval session or whatever you did, and you've been burning 400 calories. Then you look there, things in zone 1 and 2 still use fat and ketones. So those you don't have to worry about. If you do a zone 2 light run, you still use fat to 90% and so. But if you do high intensity things or intervals, then everything in zone 3 and above, you look at the time, how much were you there. So let's say you half the hour you were in zone 1 and 2, half the hour in zone 3, 4, 5. If you use the 5 zone system. I'm assuming that you know things that you may not know, but I have other videos about them, or we do, I guess. Anyway, then let's say half of your workout were in above zone 3 and above. Then you simply take those 400 calories and say, okay, 200 calories then came to a large portion from carbs, not all the portion actually, but a large portion from carbs. And then you look up how many grams of 200 calories And that's 50 grams, because 100 grams is 400 calories. So then you have to add 50 grams to this search to make it to add up for you. So if you're just eating low carb, you need to eat 170 grams, right? Because then you're covered it. If you go keto, you will actually need to eat 70 grams carb to cover this up. And now you might be, but what happened with 50 gram rule? Well, it only applies for relatively inactive people. There isn't that much research though on this topic, but there's some, and you can for sure see that people sometimes eat 100 grams carbs. Some, I know one study on gymnasts, for example, that I think I talked about some years ago, where they eat much more, and then people, when they saw this study first, people said, but this is not ketogenic diet, they eat too much carbs. Yeah, but if you test for ketones and see them, it is a ketogenic diet. And I've also heard from other non-published but reliable sources, because some scientists in this area are also athletes and coaches, and I've heard people say they eat 150 grams of carbs and still ketosis because they work out 7 times a day and in various types of sports. So it's not impossible at all. So then, of course, if you're this person and eat 20 grams of carbs, but you need 70, then 50 grams is missing, and those 50 grams will come from 50 grams of protein. At least you usually need more protein than that. It depends on which amino acid the body has available. Some amino acids convert quite nicely to glucose. A few of them can't be converted to glucose. Not all of them can, but most of them can. So roughly 50 grams of protein is used. And then we are back to this thing I talked about. The body refuses. You get dizzy, you feel weak, you feel shaky, you feel hungry, you get all kinds of symptoms. So this is a reason for why ketogenic, for some types of people, doesn't work. They're so active, they actually need more than 20 grams. It still isn't wrong to start 20 grams to see the ketones, and then you titrate up to see how much you can eat and still be in ketosis. It is not the most common reason, though, that ketosis doesn't feel good for you. The most common reason is that you cut the carbs and don't enter ketosis. Because during all that time, the body needs to replenish glucose from proteins all the way until you get ketones. And that could be that you're eating too much carb. You're not eating 20, you're eating 50 or 60, or you're very sensitive, insulin sensitive, or you don't count sugar alcohols, they should be counted just a carb, and so on and so forth. But the number one reason people don't lose the weight they want, or don't feel weak, or get these more negative symptoms, is that they're not in ketosis, but they thought they were. And the second most common is that they are in ketosis, but actually need more carbs because they're active and need more carbs to get the equation to go together, so to say. So I hope this in a way is like advanced ketogenic diet guidelines, but it's not that complicated. I think it's just some simple math, but it's not often talked about. I know some coaches use it when they coach, but they don't talk about it. But I feel, please let me know if you have questions. Sometimes I feel things are straightforward and then they aren't. And sometimes they are and I overcomplicated them for you. Please comment and question. And as you see, if you have questions, sometimes I get an idea to do a new video because I realize no one will have covered this. Because I know some of people that do question on the channel have quite large experience of what they're asking. So then I realized, okay, no one has really talked about this, I guess, otherwise they would have known about it. And then I try to fill that gap in the space, so to say. Okay, so thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you like this. So come up with more interesting stuff. Not only about ketogenic diet. If this is your first view here, talk about all kind of nutrition and exercise, longevity sometimes. It varies a little bit, but try to get out a bit unique material, insightful material. So I don't do updates every day, but when I feel I have something of interest to communicate about, or when I have a different opinion than other gurus, then I also want to highlight that, because it's not so much point to say the same thing that 100 other people already said, in my mind. Okay, thank you for listening, and see you soon again. Have a nice day.